This is Sony 50mm f1.2 G Master, and I have been extensively using this lens for the past 3 years. My name is Magic, I'm a destination wedding photographer. I've been shooting weddings all around the world in the last 10 years, and I have shot over 100,000 photos with this particular lens, delivered over 30,000 photos to my clients, actual paid clients. And today I want to give you my updated review with many samples and my opinion about this lens. And you can probably guess, since I have delivered over 30,000 photos with it to my clients, like, it has to be awesome. But for those of you not yet fully convinced maybe, or you're on the verge of buying this one versus other ones, maybe 1.4, maybe a Zeiss lens, maybe you're just not sure if you need the 1.2, this video will be for sure helpful. And starting with the build of this lens, I have to say it's pretty bulky. It's the biggest lens in my arsenal. It's substantially bigger than 35-1.4 G Master and a 24, and like that trio is like trio of the main lenses I use. It is smaller than 85 G Master that I sometimes use, but like for my main lenses, this one is the biggest one. But that size personally doesn't bother me too much with any of the newer lenses. So starting with A7R4, A7 IV, A7R5, all these cameras, they have like a bigger grip, and it just fits really well with the lens, even this size. And my hands aren't that small, to be honest. It might be less comfortable for those of you who are using older cameras like Sony A7 III and A7R III, which has like a smaller grips. The whole build of this lens, it's what I personally call G Master treatment. So we have the same kind of plastic material. We have aperture ring that is the clickable. We have two custom buttons. We have AF to MF switch, and we have focusing ring on the top. And I have to say, I am a big fan of this construction, of this build. The material that they use are excellent. So this is one of my 3 main G Master lenses, and just like the other two, on the body itself, it has like zero wear. Actually, there is no single scratch on the body of the lens. And I kid you not, I treat my lenses like rocks. I put them on the ground, I put them on the floor, I just use them. The only wear that you will see on my unit is going to be on the top ring, which I feel it's just made from a different material. There's like some scratches probably from hitting some things when shooting, and there's like a tiny scratch pattern on the aperture ring. But aperture ring itself, it's as sturdy as it was on the day one. Like, it clicks perfectly, and I use aperture ring on a daily basis when shooting with this lens. So the resistance is still there. It didn't go loose at all. Something that, in my opinion, happened with the Zeiss. I used Zeiss 51.4, and also the body was metal body, and like it scratched really well. So I think it was a really good call from Sony to switch the construction of the lenses from metal to this kind of material one. The only thing I noticed, and I noticed this on a 35-1.4 G Master with my long-term review, like the same type of review I do for this lens, you can check it out on my channel, is that the focusing ring is not as smooth as it was on day one, and it does make a sound actually. So that's something that was not originally with this lens. It was like pure buttery smooth. There was no sound whatsoever when using focusing ring. I personally don't use the focusing ring at all, so maybe it just went like this because I don't use it. I don't know, but that's the thing I wanted to mention. So let's talk performance and the images. And before we do that, I just want to say that I thank you. Thank you for watching this video. Consider subscribing if you are new here. Like, my channel is all about Sony lenses, cameras, third-party lenses, trying out all these things with my wedding photography experience. And if you're a wedding photographer, make sure to check out my free Flash mini lesson. So in wedding photography, Flash had become huge. So if you don't know anything about Flash, just check out the lesson. That's the first basic lesson when I introduce how different settings affect the flashlight. In 10 minutes, you'll get the basic foundations on how to use flash. You can access the lesson via the link in the description. Thank you very much. Okay, so performance-wise, that 50-1.2 is just best in class. And I say that after trying it out with the new Sony A9 Mark III. So autofocus system is just insane. You can shoot 120 frames per second when using f1.2 aperture, so with tiny shallow depth of field, and that combo just works like fire. It's just insane that camera can focus at that speed and the lens can just like simply catch up with that speed. Crazy. This lens is just pure class and have never let me down. But if you're doing video work, that's something that you have to take into consideration. There's quite visible focus breathing. So if you're focusing on something that is close and then you're focusing on something that is far away, you're gonna see the shift of the angle of view. All the new Sony cameras have focus breathing compensation, but that comes at a expense of a slight crop. The image. So I'm using this lens at every wedding I photograph. It's my second lens for majority of the day. I use it for getting ready photos, group photos, if I have enough space, obviously ceremony and portraits. The goal for me with lens like this is to get the separation from the background, right? So I'm going to use that f1.2 a lot. So when I use it, for example, shooting a group photo, I just make sure everyone is lined up so I can use that f1.2 and create that extra depth in that group photo. For portraits, often I'm going to shoot backlit. Again, I'm trying to create that extra depth using that f1.2 aperture. The background is very smooth with this lens, like creamy smooth. And of course, it depends on the distance between your subject and the background, and you're gonna have a different levels of the blur. In almost all cases, it's just smooth. Often when taking portraits with this lens, I'm gonna try to find the location, I'm gonna try to find a spot that I will be able to showcase that kind of possibilities that I have with this lens. So for example, in portraits like this, I'm here shooting side to that green wall to create that extra depth. Or here, exactly the same example, there's a wall of flowers and I'm shooting, side to it so I can create that depth effect. Different example will be portraits like this when I try to place the subject within the multiple different layers of greenery. And I feel like this is where this lens like truly shines, giving you outstanding sharpness, where you're focusing at, and then smooth, creamy bokeh. If I shoot indoor ceremonies, so let's say church traditional ceremonies, I do have like two signature shots that I always try to take using 50-1.2. And that's gonna be during the vows. I'm gonna stay in the middle of the aisle, slightly lowered, shooting slightly upward, as close as possible to feel the full frame with my couple. The goal is to separate them as much as I can from the background. And then the other shot will be after the vows. There's a short period of time when I try to get in front of my couple, and now I'm shooting with the whole church in the background. So that creates even smoother background blur due to the depth of that scene. And again, 50-1.2 just shines in a scenario like this. Another great benefit of having f1.2 lens in your arsenal is going to be low light scenarios. And again, thanks to that super fast autofocus system in these examples, paired with my A7R5, I can get shots from the dance floor at f1.2, 1/125 of a second without boosting ISO that much. So here you can see, for example, ISO 3200. And if you feel like this lens is just too sharp and too clinical, which it is, you can also use it along with some mist filters. So I tried both black and white mist filters, and for example, for this wedding, I knew that my bride, she wanted slightly softer portraits look. So for certain moments of the day, I used 1/8 black mist filter from Nisi, and it just worked great. White mist, on the other hand, I just used for just several portraits when I was going after that super dreamy look. In my opinion, it's just too much for weddings, but it's amazing for portraits and photo shoots with like a theme that, that dreamy effect will just work. I think then pairing a lens like this, so 51.2 with a white mist super dreamy effect filter just works like a charm. And shooting backlit with this lens, so I had no issues with either focusing or maybe drop of contrast. There is nothing like that. I think this lens performs fantastic in scenarios like this, with one little but. There's no flare, which is kind of constant theme with all the G Master lenses. These lenses are made not to flare, so that's by the design. But I did manage to get maybe a tiny flare in like a certain photo, certain scenarios, but I do miss the flare from the good old 51.2L version 1 from Canon for DSLRs. That was like crazy flaring lens. Or I do have a Leica Samilux 51.4, the older version that I adapt to my Sony purely for flare. Speaking of missing imperfections, like the same comes down with that creamy bokeh. So on one hand, I love creamy bokeh because it's just so battery smooth. It doesn't distract you from the main subject. But also, on the other hand, I do miss some of the character of like the vintage lenses. I feel like Zeiss 51.4 had a slightly more edge with that background. There was just slightly more character in that background blur. And obviously there's just tons of vintage lenses that you can adapt to your camera in order to achieve the vintage look in the background. My absolute favorite from back in the day when shooting DSLR cameras was this Zeiss Planar 51.4. It was a Canon mount lens, and yeah, the bokeh was just, I loved the bokeh from this lens, and I kind of am eyeing to get one used so I can use it on a tilt adapter on my Sony cameras. I think that would just look great. But with fun lenses, you know, the thing is that I'm just going to use them in a certain moments of the day for like a certain time of the day, because there are limitations with like a vintage fun lenses. There are usually manual focus or just not perfect, obviously, so you cannot use them all day long. So for 95% of the day, I'm still gonna use and rock my G Master lenses. And overall, my thoughts are, I freaking love 50mm f1.2. You can see from the images, you can see how many different images I've shot over the years with that lens. And the only lens I considered replacing this one with was the newer 50mm f1.4 G Master. And I've been talking about this a couple times already. I have so many questions. I think that's the most common question and the most viewed blog post on my website. 50mm f1.2 G Master versus 1.4 G Master, because that 51.4 just comes in a smaller package and it has like everything that 1.2 G Master has. Like, so everything I said about 1.2 G Master, you can say about 1.4 G Master, but in a smaller package with a tiny difference of that difference between 1.2 versus 1.4, with 1.2 just getting that slightly extra pop in terms of, you know, your subject versus the background. And that's something obviously your clients will never see. It's purely for our pixel peeping needs. And that's exactly my case, to be honest, because when preparing for this video, I called 135 images that I wanted to show some of them with you in that video. And out of those 135 photos, 113 were shot at f1.2. So as you can see, I do take advantage of shooting wide open as much as I can because I love that look. And if you are deciding between these two, I think it comes to like a simple two questions. Does size matter to you? Because if size does matter and you just need the gear to be as compact as possible, you just go for 51.4 and you will never look back. If the size doesn't matter, the second question is, how often are you shooting wide open? Are you that, you know, wide open photographer? If yes, then just go for 1.2. You're just gonna have like slightly extra pop in your images. And if you're maybe considering other 50mm lenses, so obvious choice would be also 51.4 size, which I talked about. And that size is a beauty. Like, the image is beautiful. I freaking love that image. The only issues are technical flaws of this lens. So like obviously the build, I was talking about it. It's a metal build. It's gonna be heavy it's going to be as big as 51.2, and then it scratches a lot. It also has like the aperturing is not that tight. It can go really loose over time. But the biggest flaw that I've experienced over the years, I've seen so many bad units of 51.4 size lens. Units that would go like slightly sharp on one edge of the photo, or just would go not sharp in a certain distances. So it's slightly harder to pick a good copy. I've never heard anything about a bad copy, bad unit of 51.2 or 51.4 G Master. And there are also a bunch of third-party lenses. There are Sigmas, Samyangs. So my only experience is with Sigmas that are just almost as good as the G Master lenses. They just are bigger, bulkier, and they don't share the technical possibilities of the G Master lenses when paired with Sony bodies. So things like focus breathing or being able to shoot 120 frames per second, you will not be able to get that with any of the third-party lenses. This is exclusive for G Master lenses. And that's my take. You can check out all the photos that I showed you in this video in my blog post. The link is in the description. Thanks so much for watching. See you soon. Ciao, ciao. 120 frames per shot. You can shoot 120 frames per shot. You can shoot